it'll be Marianning and Dorset Coast.
But this week you get to suffer through with me.
We have a whole trip to suffer with you.
I know, it's going to be awesome. Me and you are sitting by each other. I've already talked to your wife. And she said, thank you, Randy. Thank you very much. Today we are going to do our very best in the next 50 minutes to make it through the fabulous life and times of James Hutton. And I stole that, The Man Who Found Time. That's actually the title of a book that Scott loaned me to go through and extract some information, etc. And it's a little bit misleading. There were people in China before this point in time who were formulating theories, and some of the things that Hutton worked on were things that Buffon had conceptualized in France, but Buffon was an idiot and went out and found rocks on the sides of hills and stuff. Anyway, it was lots going on there. So we're just going to jump right in. He was born in Edinburgh and raised in Edinburgh and studied in Edinburgh and died in Edinburgh. I mean, really, he did get out, but he really liked the city. When he was 3 years old, his father, who was a merchant as well as the city treasurer, passed away. Young age, unexpectedly. But unlike, and this would have been traumatic. If this was William Smith, that would have been the end of the end. But Hutton was somebody, unlike William Smith. And the way that, the class system worked back, in the UK in these days, Hutton's father owned land in numerous different places, a couple of farms, land that could be rented out. They had family money, etc. So I'm not going to go so far as to say he was an upper echelon aristocrat, but a lot of Hutton's friends later in life are the professors who teach at the Edinburgh University, and Hutton didn't have to teach. In fact, very rarely in Hutton's life did he have what they call employment, where he was expected to do something for a wage. Most of the time Hutton could just pay his own way and go do what he wanted and travel where he wanted. This is St. Giles. We'll walk right past it as we walk down the Royal Mile, this big, beautiful cathedral on the south side of the mile, the High Kirk of Edinburgh. And then if we just keep on walking up, past the periodic table over here, we'll get to the castle in just a little bit.
Are they hanging out laundry right there?
That's really what it looks like, yeah. So I'm not judging, but that is really what it looks like. And maybe for the part of that is when Hutton was born, 1726, this is the most densely populated town in all of Europe. And it's the most overcrowded, and it's filthy. And the reason for that is in the early days of Edinburgh, when, the early days of Edinburgh go way back to the Celtics, but because of the topography was very advantageous for protection. But and that's where the castle is built up on top of the knob. There's a wall that's built around the city, and basically by edict, this is the capital of Scotland. By edict, you have to live inside that wall. So there's a overcrowding problem brought on by their own design. Now that changes right about the time James hits his stride, and we'll get to that.
Just because of all the strife with Britain, and so they just...
I think it was strife with Britain, but more than that, it was strife with themselves, and it's Scotland, and Ireland is just right the crap over there. When Hutton is gone in 1745, there's this uprising in Scotland that he got to miss the entire thing, and the Highland army came down from the north to invade, and the people here, this is the political hub of Scotland, and so all the northerners, these are the enemy as well. And so they came down and they basically, occupied Edinburgh for a year or two and took what they wanted, etc., on their way to invading England and getting their butt handed to them. But all that happened while James was gone, and we'll get there. So attended high school, attended university, and as he was right at the change there of going to high school and going into Edinburgh University, he was apprenticed to a lawyer. And things could have turned out extremely different for him, but James was smart and he hated it. the bookkeeping, he hated the whole, everything to do with it. And so at that point, he started to apprentice for a physician, and actually over the course of a year worked his way into becoming the physician's assistant. In high school and in college, he loved chemistry, loved math, loved aspects of science, etc. And so shortly hereafter, he makes the pilgrimage away from, his homeland. This is all he's really ever known, and he's going to go to Paris. And so here we are looking kind of to the west. The castle up there, the Royal Mile, is going to be down here kind of in front of us. And that's not the cathedral, that's the writer. What's his name? Scott.
Robert Scott.
Yeah, that's the monument to Walter Scott, the cathedral. In fact, this picture might be taken from the top of the cathedral, looking over at the Dolerite that's holding up the castle, and I'll admit 100%, I had no idea what Dolerite was.
We call it diabase.
We call it diabase, and some people call it micro gneiss or micro gabbro, yeah, etc. So there's the Dolerite, because we have to be Scottish. You have to eat haggis and call it Dolerite.
Are you gonna drink the whiskey?
I'm more of a Canadian whiskey guy, but we can, and they don't call it whiskey, they call it Scotch.
Oh, they could.
Yeah.
call
Also
it-
have Iron Brew. That's a good substitute.
So, just really quick, as we finish off his childhood and get this taken care of. At 21, he attends the University of Paris, and notice that he attends the University of Paris in 1747, and in 1749, he is a doctor of medicine. So this is the guy you want working on you, because he's got a 2-year degree from the French. That I'm sure he's qualified to do everything: brain surgery, set a femur, whatever you want. And I think about this because that kind of startled me. It's like, well, 1749. How much do they actually know about the human body and the way all of that works? They probably could learn all of that in 2 years. Yeah, he did his PhD, his dissertation. They called it his thesis on blood circulation pathways in the body, things that we call veins and arteries. And then he returns back to Edinburgh in the mid-1750s with a stopover for a little while in London. So basically what he's done is he's left Edinburgh, he's come down to Paris, which is off the map, and made his way back up to London 2 years later, and then he's going to make his way back up to Edinburgh. And when his father died, James inherited the family estate because he's the son. Sorry, ladies, this is just the way it worked. 3 sisters and James. And the sisters never married, but James took care of those sisters his entire life. Now, there's a little bit of a scandal here as well. Later on, when James passes away, so James has been dead for a couple of months, James Hutton shows up in Edinburgh.
Is that from his girlfriend? And
He-
she went down to London.
And she went down to London, yeah, and evidently he never even really saw or met the child, but it had his name, and James comes up to Edinburgh later and lives there, and James's friends, Blackwell and Hume and these guys, took care of his grandchildren for him because he'd passed away. After he gets back to Edinburgh, he's going to move out here to the coast where the family farm, I should say farms, are at. His dad had a couple of pieces of property out in Berwickshire, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from Sycamore Point, etc., etc. This is really the point in time where he starts looking at the earth. Up until now, he's done medicine, he's done chemistry. When he gets back to Edinburgh, he starts his own business. Him and a buddy start making this chemical business. This is the area around Berwickshire. The name of the farm is unpronounceable. And if you do a Google search on the name of the farm, nobody's ever heard of it before, but it shows up in a couple of books here and there, etc. But it would have looked similar to this, the rolling hills. And one of the things that James was really interested in when he was out running the farm for the basically 2 years that he really was the main person, is there was a lot of digging and trenching and draining of the land and putting in of a couple of canals on the property. Now, who does that sound like?
Smith.
Sounds like, yeah, really. And he probably had people working for him to do this, but this is really where he started to become interested in what was underneath his feet. So he's about 27 years old at this point in time. He's been to Paris. He's supposed to be a doctor, and now he's kind of becoming a farmer, and his hobby is this kind of budding science, geology, looking at the earth, etc., etc. Back in town, everything would have been really pretty much the same. You know, we're at right in the middle of the 18th century. The Royal Mile would have been a slum. There would have been, you know, vendors on the street and people getting run out of town, and it would have stunk to high heaven. There's no central sewage or anything like this. And in the middle of the century, it was still just a tremendously filthy city.
At 7 p.m., or you can tell this.
No, go ahead.
At 7 p.m., they would empty the bedpans.
Yep.
Just throw it out the window.
Out the window.
And then wash it down the street. Hope the rain washed it down the street, so you didn't want to be out walking around it.
7 p.m. Yeah, so, and they still do that to this day.
They wait for Americans to.
Exactly.
Or English.
But even with all of that, James leaves the family farm and moves back into Edinburgh. Now, the first half of the 18th century in Scotland was kind of rough. There was a revolution, or at least an uprising. There's really, really filthy, ragged conditions in Edinburgh and Stirling and some of the other major cities. But the second half of the 18th century in Scotland is called the Age of Enlightenment. And most of you have, heard the name of Adam Smith, David Hume, maybe Ferguson, maybe Joseph Black. And the reason there's a star by Black is because Joseph Black was James Hutton's best friend. So these guys did everything together. And part of that, if we look, Adam Smith is a philosopher, economist, and Hume is very similar. Joseph Black is a chemist. And James loves chemistry. And it's at this point in time that Hutton, during the Age of Enlightenment, gets his chemistry business up and running. Now, the main focus at this point in time of the way the earth was created was a theory coming out of Germany from a German geologist named Abraham Werner. And Werner's dad was a mineralogist type person, worked in some mines and quarrying and was in the mineral industry. I guess that's a better way to put it. And so Abraham was kind of apprenticed in that realm and really picked it up really well. And he's quite a bit younger than Hutton. Hutton was born in 26 and Abraham's born in 49, so there's almost a 25-year gap here. Well, at this point in time, Hutton's not even a geologist yet. He hasn't even written his first geologic paper. During the 2 years he was back out managing the farm, he wrote a couple of papers that were circulated around Edinburgh about farming and canals and drainage and farming improvement and stuff like that. So, he's a greenhorn. He hasn't even started. And this young upstart kid from Germany is formulating a theory that's being published all over the place in all the centers of learning called Neptunism. And in his theory, Werner says that all the rocks, the primary rocks, which we'll identify, precipitated out of a primeval ocean in an orderly fashion. Granite, schist, quartzite. You hike up to the top, the core of an old mountain range, those rocks. Those are the ones he's talking about. And then the sedimentary rocks that we see lapping up onto those rocks precipitated out during the flood. So we get the primeval ocean, which was during the creation, and Werner didn't really buy into the people who took his theory of Neptunism and spliced it together with the Bible story and the flood and everything. He thought that there was probably, that the timing didn't really work, but he loved the notoriety. And he was very popular, and the Christian world lapped this up. So we've got our primary rocks with the sedimentary rocks, which are called secondary rocks on top of that. And Plutonism has been around for a while before this, that there's this heat engine inside the earth. And that heat engine melts rocks and pushes things up, and the material that's getting pushed up in a molten state is forced into different areas, but it really didn't go very far. So, primary rocks. Primary rocks are formed during the creation, during this primeval ocean, and they're found at the highest points in mountain ranges. And then lapping onto those are deformed sedimentary rocks, like the Grey Wackies over in Wales and stuff like that. And the reason that they're all at such weird angles and tilted, this is great, I love this, is because those granites and quartzites and schist were deposited in irregular pieces as the primeval ocean dissipated. So then, no original horizontality here, folks, these early sedimentary rocks in the transition layers are deposited on the sides of them, vertically, upside down, wherever they had to go. And then we put our secondary rocks, which are the horizontal, normal, what we would call the Paleozoic section here in Utah. And then we finally get the stuff on top, the frosting, alluvia, which is dirt and recent volcanic deposits and things like that. And this is his basic premise that he's gone through here, and everybody loves this. In fact, Scott was saying just before we started that one of the reasons that Smith was poo-pooed by the Royal Geological Society of London,
He didn't subscribe to Verner.
he didn't like Neptunism. Yeah. So yeah, we can't have that. You've got to be a Neptunist. We need T-shirts. We all need to be Neptunists. So Hutton chooses. Hutton is much more a Plutonist than Hutton is a Neptunist. The Neptune thing doesn't make any sense to him from stuff he's seen in his childhood, stuff he's seen possibly out a few miles from Sycamore Point, which doesn't make its way into the lecture until the very end, but that's where the family farm is, basically. Gonna put Mike on the spot. So he's from Edinburgh, we're down here, and he's got all of this. Why would he think Plutonism was, what is all this, Mike?
It's good stuff. That's the Northern Appalachians, and we want it back.
Yeah. There's tons of granite. And in '64, Hutton took a big field trip and made his way up into Scotland and saw places where the granites, in his view, had intruded forcefully into some of the rocks up here in the central Scottish Highlands. He couldn't explain it where the granite existed previously, and then the sedimentary rocks were deposited around that. He rents out the family farm after he takes this field trip so that he can spend his time on geology. This is just totally fascinating to him. But Hutton isn't looking for accolades. Writing the book, publishing, being Verner, being that guy, that's not important to Hutton at all. To Hutton, the joy is in the journey and the learning. And in fact, he probably wouldn't have ever written his book if it wouldn't have been for Blackwell encouraging him to get this out there. You've done this is your life's work. You need to put this through. You need to finish this. In 1770, he built a house at St. John's Hill, which we'll see in a minute, has a beautiful view of the Salisbury Crags, which we're going to talk about here in just a couple of minutes. 1783, he is one of the joint founders of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So Scotland now has their Royal Society, just like London does. And they co-founded this club, him and Adam Smith, called the Oyster Club, which would meet on the Royal Mile in a pub that, and they would have these glorious talks every Friday evening over dinner, sometimes into the wee hours of Saturday morning, about what they were working on. Because this, again, is the Age of Enlightenment, and there's all of this going around. And Benjamin Franklin was a member of the society, etc. He didn't come very often. He was in other places. Yeah, that didn't work out for him. And then to just kind of tie it back in for a second, because this is kind of cool with the William Smith, he was one of the geological consultants. In fact, he was the geological consultant and part of the board of directors for a canal building project called the Forth and Clyde Canal. Now, this is Clyde over here, the Firth of Clyde. Actual translation of Firth?
What?
The Firth Inlet, or, yeah. So this is the Firth of Clyde, and this is the Firth of Forth. I know, the Firth of Forth. I would love to go to the Firth of Forth. And what they're going to do is, using natural waterways, they're going to create a canal off of this river and make its way over into another river over here, and they're going to make it so you can transport trade goods from here to here without going all the way up and around the top. And so he was one of the geological consultants because he self-trained geologist, had a really good understanding. And the green stuff there in the middle that's exposed to the surface, most of that, sorry Mike, is sedimentary stuff, carboniferous if I'm not remembering it too incorrectly. And then the red stuff, of course, is volcanics mixed in as well. So doing a little canal building himself. Now, he moves into town and builds this house in 1770 at St. John's Hill, number 3 St. John's Hill. And I believe the reason for that is because it was the 3rd house built at St. John's Hill. And we'll talk about St. John's Hill a little bit more. The house no longer exists. There's a lot, because we're going back in time an additional 50 years, 60 years prior to William Smith, there's a lot less information. We don't know where, we know he was born in Edinburgh, we don't know where. A number of things like that we just don't know, and we'll see some more of that here in a couple of minutes. Down towards the base of the Salisbury Crags, there is this memorial garden that I didn't know about at all until I started putting this presentation together. The memorial garden actually sits at number 3 St. John's Hill. So the house is no longer there, but there's this cute little garden, and one of the reviews that I read about the garden, and all this is local stone or stone that's important to Hutton. One of the things that I read is this gentleman, this is right next to the university, and one of the gentlemen was saying, I've walked by this 50 times. And then one day I'm walking by in the rain, no less, and I glanced over and thought, I wonder what that is. And when he went over and saw what it was, he was just intrigued that he spent an hour here standing in the rain looking at all of this stuff. And you'll love this, especially this rock right here. This is for you. This is you. I got you. I got you. Okay? All right, so zoom in just a little bit. This is the plaque that you can see right there on the pedestal as we walk in. And this memorial garden was constructed in 2001 for the University of Edinburgh and marks the site of the house and garden of James Hutton at 3 St. John's Hill. The garden contains a memorial plaque right there and 5 boulders indicated on the key, which illustrate 2 of the main themes of Hutton's geological work. The boulders were brought in. These boulders are from Glentil, and they're marble-ish schist with granite veins penetrating through them. The other boulders are sandstone and conglomerate, which kind of detail another aspect of Hutton's research. Because what Hutton was driving towards is that Neptunism was wrong, and that granite is not a primary rock. Granite is younger than the rocks it's found in, and it comes up from inside the earth as a liquid. And that's what the rocks from Glentil show. And then the rest of the earth, the surface of the earth, the secondary rocks that we live on, these secondary rocks are a result of recycling, where they have been eroded and weathered and deposited and eroded and weathered and deposited, being re-uplifted by this heat engine coming from inside the earth. And so that's why the conglomerates are put there as well. And these are all from places where Hutton had gathered information for his book. We talked about most of that. So then we zoom in a little bit further. James Hutton, philosopher, scientist, founder of modern geology, lived in the house on this site from 1770 until his death. In fact, died in the house, etc. So anyway, hopefully I don't think it's but a 15-minute walk from the hotel. I really don't, based upon the map. So hopefully we can make it over there. Okay, there. So told you I had you. Yeah. So the gray is it's a dolomitic limestone with silica and clay in it. And then when it was metamorphosed, it was de-dolomitized and turned into this marble-ish schist. And then we have these white veins of granite that pierce through it and inject into it. So backing up some of Hutton's claims and Hutton's theories. And this is actually from Glentil up to the north, where Hutton went on his 1964 field trip and where he will go back to shortly. And then the conglomerates as well. They couldn't actually just bring in a piece of, Sycamore Point and stick in there, I guess. So they had to just use the conglomerates. Local geological map, all the blue stuff here, Carboniferous sediments. And here in Edinburgh, here's the crags down here towards the bottom. We've got volcanic plugs, we've got extrusive lava flows. This isn't showing that there's actually some of this green, which is intrusive sill-like material, and those are the
Dolerites.
dolerites. There's actually some of that down here as well. And Hutton lives about right here where the bottom of the U is, and just has this spectacular view. And then Sychar Point out to the side over there where we've got the Devonian and the Ordovician Silurian juxtaposed against each other. Zoom in on the map. This is James's house right here. And here is the Salisbury Crags, Holyrood Palace. There's an exhibit that's been in Edinburgh for a number of years now that I didn't even know about, which we'll be right next to. I don't know. It's called Dynamic Earth. Not sure what it is, or if it's more for elementary school kids. And if it is, some of the students might like to go.
Sounds like a good name for textbook.
Yes. Here's High Street, which is also called the Royal Mile, running right up through town. And I believe our hotel is right here off of St. Mark's. Is that right? Yeah, I believe our hotel is like right there. So, and you can walk from here to St. Giles Cathedral in 15, 20 minutes. So I'm hoping that that's not that far, and the castle up here on the top, and the monument to Scott, which wasn't there when Hutton was around. Hutton's older than Scott is, etc. This dolerite, which I had to look up, microgabbro, also in America called diabase. So when Mike calls it diabase while we're in Scotland, we'll just have to hope that some of the locals...
We won the war.
We weren't fighting the Scots, though. In fact, I don't know that we would have won if we were fighting the Scots.
They were screwed.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. This is the castle. So they're at the Edinburgh Castle, and the castle sits on this massive plug of this dolerite, which was emplaced as a shallow sill. So very resistant to weathering, forms a topographic high, and throughout the history of this area geographically for 2,000 years, they can verify that this was a place where people lived because it was easier to defend than being down in the flatlands. And so when the Scots came in and the castle was built, it was just the natural place. But this is the view that James would have had out of his front door if he had like an 8-story house or something like that. But you have to understand that most of that wouldn't have been there at the time. Oh, and this bears mentioning as well. When James came to town, the wall around town did not include this area here just to the north across Princess Street, which is also called Newtown. And most of James's friends, who were these collegiate types, part of the Age of Enlightenment, Hume and Adam, etc. They're building their houses up here in this newly opened part of town, and Hutton builds his house down here. And part of the reason for that is the university's down here, his laboratory is down here, his chemical plant that he built that helped support him throughout his life is also down here in this southern part of town. So it just makes a lot more sense that he was down there. All right, as you hike up onto and there's trails all over the place, and we've ordered some more guidebook information about it today. This is that thing called Dynamic Earth or whatever, underneath that big canopy, etc. And so Hutton's house would have been just over off the far side of the picture, out of view here. As you hike up onto the section, one of the things that you come across as you go up onto the crags is a place where it's called Hutton Section. And this is one of the key pieces that led Hutton to believe that he was right. This is what prompted him to see this through, is this outcrop right here. And what we have here are sedimentary rocks that are being torn apart and forcefully injected by this microgabbro being emplaced as a sill. And it looks a little odd around here because the temperature of this material as this was taking place, this was all turned into glass from what I've read, and now it's been devitrified and looks kind of ugly. What's really funny though is these pictures. So here's the blow up. Yeah. So you've got, I'm assuming this is Hutton, and this is somebody working with him, etc. Okay, just to give you a sense of scale here, That's a pen right there.
It's not a walking cane.
Yeah, you could cover this whole thing up by laying on it.
Humans are bigger.
Humans are bigger now. That's exactly right. So I'm not sure why, but and these drawings were done by who illustrated Hutton's book? Anyway, the gentleman who no, it wasn't Playfair. The gentleman who illustrated Hutton's book was a really dear friend of Hutton's, and he made a number of these drawings, and this is simply one of his drawings that they've put onto this little stand here at the base of Hutton's section at the crag. And if you hike up above, it's, there you are, and you can see there's a little more of that diabase sill running through, in this case, the basalts higher up on the cliff face. So it would have looked a lot different if we could go back in time about 350 million years ago when this was all happening. You've got the pre-existing, according to Hutton, sedimentary rocks. And then you have the emplacement of Arthur's Seat, the cinder cones, and their associated shallow sills. And some of these sills are actually being injected later right into and underneath the sides of the cones, etc. Sea level is going to fluctuate a number of times over the next 30 million years while this process goes on, and put down sedimentary rocks with volcanic rocks mixed in, etc., etc.
You said this is Ordovician?
Yeah, no, Devonian. So this is the crags themselves. Again, Hutton's house is about where the star up here is, so quite the view. There's a small outcrop down here, and I can't ever remember its name, but it'll show up on one of the other pictures. This is actually, this cliff right here is what's called the Salisbury Crag. The whole park, and this graphic, this drawing, comes out of a guide that you could get if you were visiting the park in 1880. So imagine going to the Grand Canyon in 1880 and what they would have had for you. They would have had nothing. It wasn't a park in 1880. This is Hutton's Rock. Have to go, right? I mean, we're there, and it's really anticlimactic. But this is Hutton's section over tucked into here. This area here, there's Arthur's Seat, which has a couple of different names, and then there's a chapel that's built up on top of all of this. And again, this is all this, highly resistant lava flows, etc., and the micro gabbros that have been intruded into it, and so it just has really different weathering profile than the surrounding material. The stuff surrounding it is, we're getting into the Devonian, the Carboniferous, etc., and it just weathers away much more rapidly.
So Randy, you're
Yep.
going to have a guidebook that has some of these
Oh.
illustrations in it.
We ordered it I think we can put something together. But we just ordered today, and this is all I have, is this map. So this is the primitive geological map in a guidebook that Chris ordered for us today for a walking tour. Again, Leonard's Crag. Yeah, St. Leonard's Crag. It's really small. Here's Salisbury Crags. I'm pretty sure that what we're going to find out is that one of these numbers, right, and I don't know what the numbers are all stops. The only stops that they would let you see without buying the book, which now has to be shipped all the way from Edinburgh, you can't get a PDF, are some of these ones up here. So here's Arthur's Seat, which is called the Lion Head Vent. And this is called the Lion's Haunch Vent. And this is the basaltic intrusion, and this is debris that was ejected out of the vent, and there's a lava lake, and et cetera, et cetera. But Hutton's section and Hutton's Rock are some of these numbers right along here. In fact, this all could be related to part of Hutton's section, et cetera. But there's a number of walking trails and hiking trails, most of which are highly well maintained. It's a decent tourist attraction. People come and run on these trails, so we'll all be doing our best to keep up with Jeff going. I've tried to keep up with him in the Alps. It's just totally not possible.
So do you actually see these rocks? Are they just all covered with lichen and stuff?
Well, these rocks right here, which are columnar basalts, again, got your back, are called Samson's Ribs. And so this is all basalt, and it's just this edge of this big flow. Down in this area, the way the columns erode out, you can actually see it. So no, on the crag itself, there is a lot of vegetation, but there is also a lot of outcrop because of the topography. Where if we were out at Beckfordshire, it looks like Kansas, and there's not a lot unless you go clear to the coast. And we'll see, we won't see it too much out there, but as we're riding around in the bus in numerous places, it's just relatively flat in a lot of places. Now, if we were to go north of Edinburgh, where Mike wants to go, there's a lot of topography up to the north. But again, it's rock type. We're weathering chalk and oolite and stuff down south, and it weathers easily, and it's pretty flat. Yeah. Next year, Mike will be leading a Highlands Scotland trip, and yeah. This is Hutton's Rock. Soak that in for a minute.
So why did you like that rock?
This is in a quarry where they were mining hematite that had been deposited, or probably an alteration product, right there on the face of the crag. And they pulled this rock out, and Hutton, he's a aristocrat. He asked them to leave this rock and not crush it up and send it off. It's basically just basalt with a vein of hematite running through the middle of it. And so they left it there and didn't touch it because Hutton wanted it left. So it became called Hutton's Rock. At least that's the story that you read. Yeah, who knows? Up on top, getting rid of the Arthur's seat nomenclature, just a little bit more detailed picture, again, which we can put into something probably. There's the sill, and we move up on top of that, and we've got the intrusive basalt, the daces. I'm sure this all means something to Mike.
Doesn't.
Me and Scott were talking earlier about where they come up with some of these names, and I'm sure they say the same things about us. Yeah, so we're running out of short on time. We need to move forward. So here's the big day, okay? James has been up here on the crags for years. He's toured up into the Highlands of Scotland, and he's formulating this theory that Plutonism is actually correct. And he's gathering data, but he's taking it a little bit further than anybody's ever taken it before. And so on March 7th, 1885, he had been invited about 6 months, they have a lot of lead time in this, previous, to come to the Royal Society at the university and give a presentation on his work. And so he shows up. Well, no, he didn't. Hutton was sick. He was deathly ill. I know. His life's work is going to be presented, and he's deathly ill. But by rule, he had to write everything out in some detail. And so Joseph Black read his talk for him, one of his good friends. It was the first of 2 talks that Hutton's going to give on his work. The next talk is going to be 4 weeks from today. And most of the first talk that Black read was about the formation of stratas and layers and the role of heat and pressure in lithification and uplift and stuff like that. It was pretty basic Plutonic stuff. 4 weeks go by. April 4th, 1785. A question. And this is Hutton. Hutton got up and kind of reiterated some of the things that Black had talked about, and then he began to deliver the rest of his discussion. And Scott can tell you this as well, but when Darwin was at the end and he was presenting, this is what I think, some of his closest friends had no idea how far Darwin had taken this in his mind, where he was at. Same thing happened here. These 4 or 5 friends, Hume and Blackwell, and they did not know exactly how far Hutton had taken this. A question naturally occurs within regard to time. What has been the span of time necessary for accomplishing this great work, depositing all of the strata, making it into the shapes that we see it here? It is hence inferred, and these are not quotes that come, there's space in between them, I'm just getting the highlights. It is hence inferred that we cannot estimate the duration of what we see at present, nor calculate the period at which it had begun. With respect to human observation, this world has neither a beginning nor an end. And that blew the lid off of it. There's no recorded notes on what was the reaction in the hall and that's the final sentence. What was the reaction in the hall when Hutton concluded? But even some of his closest friends were like, James, what did you just say? Oh my gosh. Now,
Blasphemy.
Totally blasphemy, because Neptunism is a young Earth process. Neptunism is a young Earth theory It goes hand in hand with the Bible. People loved it. The church loved it. Christianity loved it. And science could kind of get on board with it. Well, he just said, and granted, notice he says, with respect to human observations, he's not saying the earth is immortal or that the earth has always been, but that was brought up in numerous attack articles against him over the last years of his life and into the future. It was a common thread that Hutton thought the world had always existed. But he's saying within the realm of human observation, this world has neither a beginning nor an end. You know, time has gone on. And Hutton would never pony down. You know, James, how old is the earth? Really old. You know, he would never say, there wasn't a number that would come out of his mouth. So he finishes the talk. The world explodes. Well, now he's proving it. In his mind, he's already proved it. But now he's going to prove it. You will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what I've just told you is true. So Hutton's theory, he suggested that granite was emplaced as a fluid rising from below and not precipitated from above, and that the secondary rocks were not deposited then around the granite later. He suggested that the granite was therefore younger. And so later that year in 1785, he makes his way back up north to visit some dear old friends of his at a place called Glentil, where the rock came from that Mike so dearly wants to see. And while at Glentil, he saw some things. The next year, he makes his way down to Galloway to visit some places again that he had been before and review his notes and redo drawings. And the gentleman who did the drawing that made the outcrop look like it was 10 times bigger than it was supposed to be went with him on several of these trips and made drawings that not only appeared in his book, but some of them actually appeared in Lyell's book a little while later. And then we get to 1787, and he goes out to the Isle of Arran, not Iran, Aran, A-R-R, and does the exact same thing. Well, there you go, Mike. 1785, the year of the talk, he comes back up here, and this is basically what that boulder is. It's where it's from, that's in the Hutton Memorial Garden. The pink here is granite, and it's been intruded into these schistic marbles. So granite intruding schist and ophiocalcite marble. Scott, you want to jump on that one and just give it all out? It's a dolomite. I had to look it up. It's a dolomite that contains some siliciclastic material, hence the formation of the schist. And during metamorphism, it's been de-dolomitized back into a marble versus a dolomitic marble. I don't know where the magnesium goes. Yeah. This is a map that he drew of that area, and I have no idea what that means. It's really cool. Hutton, this is a reproduction. And then Hutton's was actually in black and white originally. There's no sense of scale. There's no key or legend or anything else. And if you look this up online, they'll say, oh, yeah, like you go to the USGS, and they'll have a copy of this on their website. And the geologic map made by James Hutton of the Glentil area. That's all it says.
And Randy, for petrologists, he's more famous for this.
Yes.
He was just looking at that.
Oh, really? Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, the Hutton Symposium every 4 years where granite people get together.
Gotcha. Well, he was a granite guy. And then, not a lot of pictures, no pictures of Galloway, but in 87 he goes out to Arran on the Firth of Clyde on the west side. We've got the granites here, and proof that he was able to find where the granites are intruding, and this picture is actually out of Lyell's book, the granites are intruding or being forced against the bedding of the rock in numerous places. And then he's got this unconformity that you can see over here, and basically there it is. That's basically Sychar Point on Arran. So this is Hutton's unconformity on Arran. You've got the coming in about here, and then the vertical ones over here. Not a really good overlap between them in that picture, but you can definitely see the juxtaposition. 1788, he needs more. And it was in 1788 that, heading back out by boat to visit some spots that he had seen before, but maybe not in as great a detail as he wanted to, him and a couple of friends, including Blackwell, and I think Playfair.
And James Hall.
Yeah, and James Hall was the young one who actually takes a lot of this forward. They pull the boat up here, they go ashore, and what they see is exactly what Hutton was looking for. This is the proof that the Earth has been recycling this material over time. That you've got, the older layers on the bottom, they've been tilted. If you want to pull in the steno nomenclature, they were horizontal when they were deposited, blah, blah, blah. And then the old red sandstone up on top of it. If you turn at this point, and you are about, I don't know, this big in that picture, kind of like that. If you turn and look over there across the inlet, this was just for scale purposes. The place where you want to get your picture taken is right there. And in order to get your picture taken, you have to go down there. Because down there, the place where you get your picture taken is right here. I'm covering you up with my hand. Okay? It's all you want. It's not very far. It'd be, in my opinion, like climbing up the stairs from the Richards building if they were 50% steeper than they are now, and then continuing up about halfway to the top of the Kimball Tower with no steps on a grassy, slippery, clayey slope. And
You're really selling this.
I am. Well, I just want people to, Riley, I don't think you're going to have a problem whatsoever. I don't think Jeff will have a problem, but there are some people like Mike in the room that
I'm just gonna jump.
I just want people to realize that if you go down there, you have to come back up that. You just need to realize that. And if you turn and look where I said a minute ago, there's the unconformity again across, we're looking across this little inlet of water there over to the side. So 1795, we get the culmination of James' work. He's delivered this talk several times and published 3 pretty well-received papers, at least well-received in his circle, the people who followed James, which is a small circle compared to this massive, all-encompassing circle of Abraham Werner.
So when he's talking at the university, is he talking to students, or is it just like the
I think there's students there, but like the front row is a bunch of old geezers in weird wigs and robes and, weird dudes. Yeah.
As a clergy, you realize what he was saying. Was there a fight brewing?
Oh, it's funny how you look at this, and one of the people who really bashed against Hutton and his idea was the geology professor at the University of Edinburgh. His name's John Walker, and he is a major Neptunist. He has actually been to Germany twice to study at the feet of the master. And so he is cranking out disciples up in Edinburgh. And so you would have all these people that would come to James's talk, but a number of them are these disbelievers who are there, and they're there to be the naysayers and stir it up. And John Walker was a minister prior to becoming a geology professor, and you see this common trend. Like with Steno being a monk and then becoming a naturalist, there's all these guys who were, in the clergy at one point in time, and now they're geologists, and so Neptunism really appeals to them because it takes both aspects of their life and merges them together. And boy, they just have all sorts of bad things to say. You've got science and the church. And in 1790, that's quite the marriage, teaming together to go after Hutton.
And they draw and quartering.
Pretty much. Well, they don't have to. He dies first. Yeah. Notice that this, Transactions of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Volume 1.
And it's still published.
Yeah, the first time Hutton's remarks were ever published was by the Royal Society, The Theory of the Earth, in 1795. Now, there was another volume that had more of it in it, and then there was a third volume that was to come out. But unfortunately, a year after, in 1796, James took very ill. They believe now he probably had kidney stones or something like that. He was in a tremendous amount of pain for about a year and a half, and the kidney stones were making it so he couldn't empty his bladder, which was leading to septicism and backing up of urine in his system, etc. And he was trying really hard to finish aspects of the book, and this third volume when he died. And then Hill and Blackwell kind of picked up the torch because they could see John Walker and some of his disciples were really, Hutton's gone, let's just tear it down and bury it now. So they picked up the torch, and Blackwell and Hill rewrote Hutton's book and reduced it from like 500 pages of 8-point font down to like 300 pages of 20-point font. Which made it much more readable, and it flew off the shelves all over Europe. And this is really kind of where it got a foothold. And all they really wanted to do was kind of fortify Hutton's legacy so that it didn't just end up in the mud. And that's where Lyell comes across all of this information as well. And then it just kind of sits, and people attack it left and right. Neptunism did not go away. Neptunism was alive and well, and then you've got Cuvier coming on the scene, and the boost to catastrophism, and then you have who took catastrophism and Neptunism and merged those together and came out and it was Buckwell. Buckwell had his own personal little synthesized theory, taking catastrophism and Neptunism and taking what he liked out of both of them and the Bible and merging those to Buckland. Merging those together a little bit. And then Lyell comes on the scene and puts everything to rest. He did. Yeah, you can't know everything, right?
Did Wegner ever have a response? Or did he just ignore it?
Oh, I haven't.
Who? Wegner?
Alfred?
Oh, Werner.
Werner.
Sorry.
No idea. Yeah, no idea. I think that Neptunism died when Werner died. Yeah, really quick because the bell rang. On the south side of the Royal Mile, over towards the crag, there is a church, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, called the Greyfriar Church. And next to the Greyfriar Church is a cemetery, and this is because priests are lazy. And so you would come to the church and you're dead, and they have a funeral service, and then they need to bury you. Well, I've got a whole big yard out back, so I don't want to take you anywhere. And so this cemetery basically goes all the way around the church, called the Greyfriar Cemetery. And this is the final resting place of James Hutton. Now, there are some cool things there. This is the dog's name. Oh gosh, I can't remember now. The story, the gentleman dies, and every day for 17 years, the dog comes and visits his master's grave and won't leave, etc. Partially a true story, but there's also a restaurant across the street from the church that would feed the dog. When it would come, and then they would tell the story and have this thing in the window. So people would come to see the dog and etc., and then they would eat in the restaurant. So it's not necessarily a true story, but there is a statue in the cemetery to the dog, and after the dog died, it was buried near where his master died. There's the map, and just so you know, Hutton is not number 39, even though it says number 39 James Hutton. James Hutton, when he died, was buried in an unmarked grave. And he was buried at Greyfriar Cemetery, but nobody knows where.
Unmarked because he didn't want to...
I don't know. Yeah, there's really no documentation on why it wasn't. Now, to go down into the south yard, unfortunately, there is a big iron gate right there next to that number 41 that looks an awful lot like that, because that's it. And you have to get a key to go through that gate. So we need to figure out who has the key and how we get in there, because if you walk through that gate, you can see the tree in the background. That tree is this tree over here. And as you walk down this south gate area, if you turn into this side yard right here, before you get to the big one, this is the Boswell yard. And as you turn into there, you'll find this plaque embedded in the wall. But this was done much later in time as well. You can tell by the carving in the granite. They don't know where he is buried in there, and this is the memorial that they have to him. So 1797, after about a year and a half of agony, passed away. Playfair was at his house the day he died, and in this book that Scott loaned me, there's a really, nice little excerpt from Playfair's journal where he talks about, how he came in and Hutton was almost gone, and they called for the doctor, who was another dear friend of James's, and as the doctor came in, James reached out his hand to the doctor and expired. And those are the life and times of James Hutton. Good times were had by all.
Well done.
Maybe you just try to tell him something so significant.
I know.